Hello and welcome to the Business of Influence podcast. It's brought to you by Style ID Africa. My name is Leroy Mark, and this is a podcast where we give you the news, the views, the reviews, and the interviews, and everything you need to know about the world of influencer marketing. Now, your elders have said to you, go to school, get a degree, do something with your life. But when you scroll on TikTok, you see that guy who's never been to university making absolute bank with his skits or his brand deals. It's a conversation about whether clicks or the classroom is more relevant. To have that chat, I have in studio with us Kamva who is a head of programs and lecturer, to chat to us about whether formal education is still relevant in a world where content creation can make you as much, if not more money. Stay tuned for more.
Are you listening?
Welcome back to the Business Influence podcast with me, Leroy Mark, in studio with Kamva, chatting everything about the world of creativity versus clicks and the school of Instagram. Kamva, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for
You said you're a virgin.
Yes, first time.
We'll make it very comfortable for you. I won't ask you too many hard questions. So you're a lecturer?
Yes.
You're head of programs. So you deal in the formal education space. Are you finding that there's less and less a need for people to go to school, especially in the creative arts, right? Because like you go into TikTok and you're seeing people making bank, like gang amount of money from creating, from being content creators, from being actors, finding their way into, formal media without ever having to go into school.
I don't think there's less of the need to go to creative institutions. I think there's been a shift for sure in terms of people kind of navigating that space without a formal education. But I think because what these institutions offer in terms of grounding the creative aspects to the actual practice, in terms of legalities, contracts, but also the business aspect of everything else, there is that need to kind of understand the industry holistically.
Yeah.
So I think there's limits when we just look at the world of Instagram, the world of TikTok, without understanding the groundwork that's needed to kind of put together either a production or even a short clip that's going to advertise a particular campaign.
See, I always find that it seems like the institutions themselves have been slow to adapt. Because a friend of mine who's studying, and I know you've been doing studying in your own right, about how there's a very big difference between teaching me the theory of what I'm doing to trying to get me to almost move backwards, where I've now mastered the skill by the school of Instagram and the streets, and now you're saying to me I have to go back to school where we have to almost like unlearn everything, but the institutions seem to have taken the approach that it's either or. You can't, when you do a master's degree, for instance, you're allowed to take what we call previous learnings,
Yes.
Working in the industry, we can credit you for that and then teach you from there. But in the creative arts, it doesn't seem to work that way.
Look, I can agree with you to say that institutions have been moving a little bit slow, but I think it also depends in terms of which institutions are we talking about. Are we talking about traditional institutions that might have a department of film and television, or are we looking at specialized institutions that focus on the creative economy, right? And when we look at creative economy institutions, I can accept that they have been also moving quite slow, but I think in that slow movement, what these institutions are really doing is assessing the playground, really, to see if this is not something like a trend that's going to come and go, but also that's something that's going to stick. So we want to look at longevity in terms of, is this something that's going to equip our students for long-term employment as well? So I think there is a shift in also understanding what the students bring to the work, but also how the industry has remodeled, right? So we're looking at curricula that also speaks to influencer and influencer insights and social media campaigns from a business perspective, from a performance perspective as well. So we haven't limited ourselves through traditional training,
Okay.
right? We have shifted, but I think we are all moving on more of like a reaction aspect rather than proactive. Yeah.
And does that then, because for me, the education aspect seems to then become more of a hindrance and that becomes a barrier to entry. So when you're going into a formal set, for instance, and we're looking for an actor, producer, a writer, whatever, and we say, okay, Kamva, what do you have? Like, what qualifications, what degree do you have? And you bring us a piece of paper. That doesn't necessarily equate to you being the most effective and most creative, because I think the bigger issue is uh, how do you create a curriculum to extract creativity? Because it's almost like innate, right?
Yes.
Where do we find that? It seems like it's almost an Achilles heel of the industry that the education actually seems to stifle the creativity because there's so few people who can. Because let's be honest, it's not cheap going to university, especially in this country.
Look, so if we look at it from the perspective of how a lot of our industry is not necessarily formal.
Okay.
So a lot of people that might not have the training can find themselves in these spaces and they can navigate the industry with some challenges, with some ease, depending on networking. And now when we look at social media, depending on their following, right? But I do think through training, there's a lot that we teach, right? And it's understanding how the whole machine works, right? If we look at a performer, for example, right, you might not be trained to perform for screen, but you're a good personality. So how you navigate set might be a challenge, right? And you understand that in our industry, time is money.
Yeah.
So if you walk into that space and you can't conduct yourself in a manner that's going to save us the money, you might find it a little bit challenging than it was to maybe put a tripod in front of you and do a quick TikTok video.
Yeah.
So I do think the training is still relevant, and I understand that our industry, even before social media, has never been one that is formal, one that actually does require a degree for you to walk into a space. But I do think it does build confidence. It builds confidence, assurance, and also allows for longevity in this industry, right? Because we don't just teach you one skill, we teach
Yeah.
you multiple skills, right? So you can find yourselves in different spaces
Yeah.
within that machine of the arts.
I like what you say about longevity, because I think a lot of people who do get into the industry through the informal means find it difficult for them to pivot. Because the other issue about our industry is that it's also time sensitive. So you can only be a ballerina or you can only do ballet for so long, or as a dancer for so long until you're just too old to do it, and then what
Exactly.
else do you transition into? But the informal nature then raises the next question about what do we do about when you start formulating curricula, because it's so informal. What do you add into the curriculum and what do you take out of the curriculum? How do you future proof this degree for the next year, the next 5 years? Because in the legal space where I come from, the codices of Justinian have been so since the beginning of time. The Constitution is not going to change very much very soon. There's an almost certainty in the education, whereas here, I mean, literally every 6 months there's a new Instagram update, a new TikTok update, a new trend, and a new way to make money.
It ca- that's a good question. I think it comes with agility, right? And being open to the change. Look at it from the perspective of AI even.
Yeah.
Look, we've been faced with the challenge of artificial intelligence within the creative space, from a writing perspective, from animation to editing. Like AI has literally infiltrated most aspects of the creative economy.
Yeah.
So what we then do, I think I mentioned this earlier, about we've been reactive to these situations and not necessarily proactive, which is a little bit problematic because we're kind of waiting to see the problem and then addressing the problem as an after effect. But I think because the industry changes so quickly, it almost feels like that is the only way to kind of navigate it.
True.
So we do sit with a lot of these changes and consider what needs to be changed, and we make those decisions through the academic board.
Yeah.
But really, it's a collaborative process between what we see is needed by the industry, but also how we can enhance it and align it with the curricula.
Yeah.
S- Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
So it's a deep one. I think our industry is almost an enemy of itself sometimes because, as you say, you need to be agile in the industry, but you also need to make sure that you are able to apply yourself in the new trends of the media coming through. And when we come back on a chat about then what do we do from a systematic point of view to make sure that we at least lay down the right foundation? Because it's all good and well to be able to be agile, but we need to have like basic minimum standards. Canva must at least know how to audition or write a basic script or understand what a 3-act play looks like. And your face says a lot. More with Canva when we come back. Welcome back to the Business of Influence podcast, still powered by Style ID Africa. I am still Leroy Mark and still in studio with Kamva, chatting everything about whether you should go to university or just hustle it out in the streets of TikTok. So, we're chatting off air about this idea of benchmarking, right? And my argument is of the creative arts, we seem to be lacking a sort of benchmark. So as a result, there seems to be a difficulty in justifying the need for formal education because when you come with a degree, what am I expecting of you as a bare minimum? And you were saying that it's almost discipline specific. Yeah.
So yeah, it's almost discipline specific in the sense that there's certain um, skills that require some level of training, right? So when we look at our cinematographers, you can't necessarily walk on the set and know what to do,
Yeah.
right? So you would need to understand lighting, you need to understand the settings in the equipment you're working with. Sound would be the same thing. Writing, you'd have to understand some basic foundational elements of writing as well
Yeah.
before you can find yourself in a writing room. But I do think because again, we don't have any governing laws or bars that kind of like restrict or standardize how we navigate the space, people can also learn on set.
Yeah.
Right. So they can find opportunities where they walk on set and they start as the cable basher.
Yeah.
Right. All you need to do is know how to roll a cable, and then you can learn how to pick up a camera and start recording.
Yeah.
Right. So because of that leeway, a lot of people can maybe start training in that from that perspective. But I do think, from an educational perspective, and why I do believe that it's important that creatives still go through the route of education, is to understand why their work exists within the South African audience.
Yeah.
Or I think what's important is that they are able to contextualize culturally what the work that they're putting out there, right? So that's what we also teach
Yeah.
them. A lot of research goes into it from a social perspective. We look at philosophy so that the work communicates something grander
Yeah.
than just moving pictures.
Yeah.
Right. We create discourses, right, that maybe speak to something social, something political. So outside of just performing, how are you forming part of the conversation surrounding social issues?
Yeah. I think when I look at what social media and what, the very undesirable term that has become influencing versus what we'll call sort of the true art, right? And I use inverted commas because we have viewed people who go to performing arts schools and creative arts institutions as the people who can get into the philosophy, who can one day. It speaks back to your point about longevity, being able to do more than just what you're doing, but also realizing, and this is something that we discuss often on this podcast, around a conversation that's just more than just churning out stuff mindlessly, because at some point, although it is a campaign driven by a content creator, it still has to have messaging. It still has to land correctly. It still has to be sensitive about what's happening, in the world right now. We've had instances of Style ID where we've had to call, creators back in and say, okay, about that thing that's happening in the Middle East, this might not be the right time to post this particular piece of work because of what's happening geopolitically, for instance. Or, in South Africa, we're dealing with this social issue right now. It's a hot button issue. Maybe let's wait a little bit. So I'm seeing that there's maybe a misalignment in understanding that sometimes it's not just about knowing what to do, but also realizing the why we do certain things. But then how do I make a case for someone who is earning, 100,000 Rand on a campaign to pause and go to school and learn all these things that don't necessarily seem to be at the forefront of execution? Because, the industry is chock-a-block of content creators. What should we be looking for to, share with the content creators about why, even if it's not at a creative arts institution, but just sitting and sharing knowledge and understanding nuance and context of what they're doing? Nice short question, hey?
Yeah, no, because I'm also trying to link it back to what we do, or with the program that I manage, right? Which is creative writing. And we look at writing holistically. We teach our students different forms of writing. And one of the disciplines we teach our students is promotional writing, so writing copy,
Oh, okay.
right, which feeds into the advertising space. It speaks directly to influencers, right, as well. But I do think what is very evident in terms of how agency works, in terms of brief and how they communicate that to maybe an influencer, still aligns in understanding what we as institutions teach, right? So that cultural, social relevance or specific relevance that needs to be addressed, those social, political issues that need to be considered when creating content, is something that you are going to receive in a brief. So if you can't contextualize that information, you might find yourself struggling to kind of meet client brief, or you might have to
Yeah.
rework a lot of the stuff. But I do think, look, if you're earning 100K from shooting TikTok videos, maybe use it to get a degree. I mean, there's no harm in learning,
Yeah.
right? Because the truth is, there's always going to be a student who's a lot more advanced, who's got experience. I'm in an MFA program where I'm sitting with executive producers of big broadcasting productions. And these are people that want to kind of advance their knowledge. And there's so many aspects to this industry outside of just, again, creating content or standing in front of the camera. Because what we do teach is, how do you carry yourself not just as an influencer, but as a business?
Yeah.
Right. So there's so many factors to it, because who's going to manage your money?
Yeah.
Right.
When the coins come
Outside
in,
of that,
yeah.
because you're making so much money, and you might be evading tax.
Yeah.
So,
SARS.
exactly. So there's a whole business aspect that we also teach to it. It's not just the creative perspective. We teach students how to be businesses.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you say that, because my next question when we come back from the break is, content creators are becoming media companies accidentally. They find themselves being these big corporations where they have lots of influence, but they might miss issues like ethics and some of the responsibilities that come with being on a big platform. So more with Kamva when the other side of this ad break. Welcome back. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Send this to all your friends. Let them know that we're on the podcast. Still in studio with Kamva, chatting everything about the school of TikTok and whether or not you still should go to university like a good kid, like we did. So Kamva, you're studying right now, an MFA, which is a Master of
Masters of Fine Arts.
Fine Arts. I was gonna go film. I was about to embarrass myself.
Same thing. Still
Because
film.
so I'm interested in understanding. You're obviously an academic because you lecture, we create programs, you quality control, and many other things. Have you found that because of your understanding of the academic side of the arts, that you're able to almost conceptually view our industry in a different lens? Are you finding that your counterparts who are self-taught who have learned through the school of hard knocks, that they have a very different view about how to go into or approach a certain body of work or project.
That's a difficult question, especially if you consider our creative landscape
Mm.
as South Africans. I do think the kind of content that South Africans produce speaks a particular language
Mm.
in terms of what stories get to be seen, whose voice gets to be heard, right? I do think we're quite far behind in addressing so much of issues around representation, social issues, that we've limited ourselves to creating entertainment that's merely there as a form of escapism or just solely entertainment,
Yeah.
right? Whereas, as somebody who's in academia, who engages with different theoretical frameworks, we engage with the work from different theories, different
Mm.
frameworks, and
Yeah.
different philosophies, right? And we embed that in our work, which challenges the audience in terms of how they engage or dissect or decode the
Yeah.
messaging that exists within the work. And this is not me saying that the audience is lazy or is not trying to engage with work on that level, but it's me saying that I do believe that um, these big business like these production companies or these broadcasters have seen a model that works,
Yeah.
which is easy, and they've stuck to that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more challenging for myself as an academic slash creative to produce work that I believe is going to make commentary on
Yeah.
on certain issues, whereas people just want to watch a simple love story
Mm.
that's not necessarily making any arguments
Yeah.
on any topics. So it's a challenge because I think at times you need to look at yourself as, am I an independent creative, which means I can make work that can exist outside of mainstream television? Then I can explore all these ideas. Or am I making work that is supposed to be marketable
Yeah.
and digestible by different markets and
Yeah.
easy to? So it's hard.
Yeah.
I do think if you go through a film school or any creative school, you are going to be tasked with engaging with your work on a deeper level.
Yeah.
But we also challenge you by looking at opportunities outside of just mainstream spaces like broadcasters. We force you to find funding in institutions that are independent,
Yeah.
that can allow your work to exist outside of your traditional form of media,
Yeah.
right? So that's the challenge. It's where your media sits and who your audience is. That's what's that's how I suppose I perceive what's currently happening within our industry,
Mm.
right? Yeah.
At the risk of being cancelled, um, and maybe it's a hard truth that we might need to grapple with, or a question that we need to grapple with to find the truth behind it, is, do you then think that we maybe are mistaken in trying to include the world of influencer marketing and content creation into the broader film production, television, creative arts part of the world? Because I'm thinking about how art can exist for art's sake, right? We don't necessarily need to make it commercially viable for it to be called art. Yet, content creators and people who are wanting to get into the influencer marketing industry are trying to get paid for it. I mean, I know we're all trying to make money. I know we're all trying to make a buck. But when I'm creating content, waiting for a brand to come on board and do a brand deal, and that's my raison for doing this whole thing, is very different from someone who is creating. Yes, they might sell the piece of art. Yes, they might perform the piece of art, but the result is very different, or the intention is very different as to what result you want. Are we maybe mistakenly bundling all this up because of unsophisticated our conversation is around our art? Or just, but they all act and play and jump and just put them there? Or should we be more intentional about segregating and separating who does what for what reason?
Oof. I think there's a space for everybody, right? I think there's a space for us to recognize influencers and that space as part of our creative economy or the art space, right? Um, and I do think that there should be space for these people in these different spaces to kind of move between whether you're an influencer or going into performance for television or film. I think we should allow people to explore those avenues, but I do think it's important for people to understand how those platforms differ
Yeah.
as well, and how there's different expectations and different practices, and um, how you show up in those particular spaces. Because I know a lot of people look down on influencing,
Yeah.
but it's not easy,
At
right?
all. Oh, trust
Like,
me.
you mentioned earlier on, it's basically you you become your own I suppose agency or
Yeah.
campaign, like your walking business. So there's so much that you need to manage as an individual. So I think what's important is that yes, we need to allow people to move through all these different spaces, but also understand that there's nuances and there's differences within these spaces,
Yeah.
and you might need to learn a skill or two before you can enter that space.
Yeah.
And we can't rely just on the fact that you've got 50,000 followers for you to walk onto a
Yeah.
set and we can call you a star when you've got no training, right? In terms of, I mean, if we look at a TikTok performer, right, or an influencer, that's one phone staring right back at you,
Yeah.
right? If you walk on a set for a big telenovela, you could have three cameras looking at you.
Yeah.
So how do you play around that
Yeah.
space and create genuine story?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
It's a
sort
tough
of
world.
it's a tough world, but I do think there's space for um, influencer TikTok to exist within the creative arts. But I do think people should be open to learning
Yeah.
and not just feel like it's just one um, uh, melodic like
Yeah.
experience, right? Film differs to television, television differs to film, agency will differ to your generic film story arc.
Yeah.
We all have different needs and we address them based on those
I think
differences.
the wonderful thing I think about adding on this element of the social media performer as an example of this new social media performer is that it also allows people to be able to monetize their talent in a way that has been gate kept for a very long time. The unfortunate thing about art is that it's also very expensive. You know, it's expensive to buy art, it's expensive to participate in art. Anyone who's gone to ballet school will tell you how expensive it is to actually just get through 6 or 7 years of ballet school. So I think this might be, you know, the ecosystem's way of finding the smaller, more accessible piece of art that can sustain certain people. So I think there's a middle ground there. In parting, when you look into your crystal ball and gaze into it, what do you think the world of creative art academia is going to look like in a few years? Do we become more niche? Do we become, you know, more open? Do we break down barriers? Do we start adding new levels to the curricula that cater for influencers and how to get brand deals?
I think the only way to sustain the academic space in terms of the industry is to be open,
Yeah.
right? So if you think back to filmmaking, films were shot on film, right? And when they introduced the digital camera, a lot of people were like, this is not going to work. The
Yeah.
quality is going to change everything. And that's changed over time. No one's really using film. It's an expensive tool to use.
Yeah.
You just spoke about the economy and the cost that goes into the art and how social media is cheaper, right? We now find ourselves, were using expensive cameras, right? We've moved away from film. We're using these expensive digital cameras. But your cell phone can just shoot
Yeah.
great quality on a cheaper budget scale, right? So I think what's happening, actually, it's currently happening, is that academia is re-looking how it's positioning itself in its offerings to these aspiring creatives, in the sense that we are exploring different avenues, vertical dramas, right? Not just content that's going to exist in mainstream television or in a cinema. We're looking at content that can also exist uh, through a TikTok feed,
Yeah.
and content that can be created on a budget scale. We're looking at short courses that can explore how an influencer can navigate acquiring campaigns. So we do understand that the industry is changing and is going to continuously change, and all we can do from our perspective is adapt with it.
Yeah.
If we hold back, we will cease to exist.
Yeah, and it is for us to make sure we do the best that we can to sustain the industry. Thank you, Kamva,
Thank
for
you for
coming
having
through,
me.
for your candor, and we look forward to many short stories written by you. And I also have a side job as an actor, so if you're looking for a leading man, just come
Don't worry,
over
I'm
to-
writing a couple of characters.
Thank you so much for coming through. That is our conversation with Kamva, and yeah, many others to come on Starlight Africa. So make sure you stay tuned to the BOI with me, Leroy Mock.
Are you listening?